Your alumni love helping students and fellow graduates, but they simply don't have time to attend every event, answer every call, or learn yet another online platform. With Protopia, making an impact is easier than it's ever been before, ever. There's no new app to sign up for or use in our already busy lives. Students, alumni, or even staff can quickly ask for advice or networking via a simple form, email, or text. Protopia's artificial intelligence searches the institution's existing alumni data to find the best experts that are the most likely to assist based on experience, availability, location, and other factors. Alum receives a direct, blind email giving alumni full control over if and how they want to respond, whether that's by email, call, or a virtual meeting. And if it's not a good time, Protopia's AI simply reaches out to the next alum until the question has been answered. The student receives advice right into her email box and is coached to engage the alum to grow her professional network. Finally, our rich dashboard lets staff follow along, view detailed engagement analytics, access updated alumni data. Protopia. Simple for them, simple for you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for listening to Alumless World for May 4th, 2025. This is the Trials and Errors in Alumni Engagement Edition. On Alumless World, we talk about constituent engagement strategies and education advancement from a global perspective. While on our other podcast, Alumless, our topics and discussions are very US-centric. On Alumless World, we try to take a broader view of advancement and how colleges, universities, and international schools are working to build a culture of engagement and philanthropy. I'm Ryan Catherwood, and I'm joined by my fantastic Alumless World co-host, Nicole Kempton. Nicole, what's going on?
Hey, Ryan. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. It's a very pollen-y day here in Virginia, where I live. It's like everything is covered in green slime. I don't know. Is that a thing in London?
It's very pollen-y, but we don't have the green slime. But I've just spoken to my mom in North Carolina, and she said that everything is buried under a thick coating of pollen right now.
Yeah. Everybody's got like perpetual sort of tears in their eyes and runny noses right now here where I live, but it's okay. Spring is here. We like that.
Yeah.
We publish a new episode of Alumless World every other Friday at 11:30 a.m. GMT, and we broadcast a 30-minute show on LinkedIn and YouTube, and then an additional 30-minute bonus segments available on the Alumless World podcast. So definitely make sure to pick up the podcast version of the show. And if you are listening on the podcast, we really appreciate that. Thanks for adding us to your feed. And please, we invite you to follow Chris Marshall Advancement Consulting on LinkedIn, where we post lots of articles, and Nicole's even taken to recording short hot takes, I would call them. Follow those. But we're grateful to Max Leiston and the team at Protopia for being our Alumless World presenting sponsor. So thanks, Max and Protopia.
Yeah, we've got Hannah Fox, who is the Director of Alumni Community, Careers, and Network Development at Regent University, and Marie-Rose Delauzun is the head of Alumni Engagement at the Sutton Trust. Both are based in London, and they together are co-hosts of a fascinating podcast that I discovered a couple of months ago called Trials and Errors, in which they interview advancement leaders about their failures. So something that we don't always talk about in the performance theater that can be advancement. So excited to have them both here today. Welcome to you both.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so why don't we start with a little bit of background about the two of you? Can you share a little bit about how you got involved in advancement work and what you're doing today? And maybe we'll start with Hannah and then hop over to Marie-Rose.
Sure. So yeah, thank you so much for having us on the podcast. My route into advancement, when I look back on it, I hear a lot of people in alumni say, I kind of fell into alumni relations and this is just how I got into it. But mine was quite a purposeful route into it. So I was working, I finished uni in 2007 and I was like, well, I'm going to get an awesome job because I've got a degree, obviously, and then realized it was 2007 and everyone had degrees and no one was getting jobs. So I fell into a reception job that led into another job that led into something 7 years later that I thought, you know what, I don't think this is my career path forever. And I was looking around at other places that I might want to work, and I saw alumni relations and thought there's a lot of transferable skills there. volunteer management. It's a lot of what I'm doing now. So I decided that this is really where I wanted to be. I liked the idea of working with international communities. I liked the idea of working for a big institution. And I approached a lot of universities in London and said, anyone fancy taking me on as an intern in alumni relations so I can learn a bit about what's going on? And UCL, actually, the guys at UCL said, hey, yeah, come and work with us for 8 months, 1 day a week. So that's how I fell into it. And, you know, I've an amazing team over at UCL who really just welcomed me into the sector and gave me some great projects to work on and really set me up for when I applied to London Business School as an alumni relations manager. To get into that job and gave me a lot of insights into what it's like to work in alumni. So not your typical entry into alumni relations. And then I had 5 years at LBS, which was where I worked with Marie-Rose, actually. You know, that's such a fantastic place to really learn about alumni relations and such a kind of advanced model of alumni relations there. Before coming to Regent and heading up the alumni program where they had very little alumni relations, or it kind of moved around. It wasn't quite sure where alumni sat. It'd been in the careers, it'd been in marketing. So the function was set up here and I was charged with developing an alumni relations program 5 years ago.
Great story.
So I guess unlike Hannah, I would say I definitely do fall into the category that I kind of fell into it, but I would still say there was a bit of purpose with me. I think like so many people in the sector, one of my many jobs when I was an undergrad student was a student caller. I was studying at the University of Exeter and I did 2 terms as a caller. I will say, full disclosure, like I wasn't that good at it. I surprisingly know history students who just graduated with all their debt wanted to give me any money at that point. I really enjoyed the conversations with alums. I enjoyed the kind of vibe of that work. So I definitely was aware of the whole function of like a fundraising and alumni office at university. But yeah, I guess I still got into it in a slightly twists and turns kind of route. So I managed somehow to get an HR assistant job at the Central University of London, which is kind of an overall body of which places like UCL and lots of other colleges are kind of part, or at least one point a part of. So yeah, I started out in HR, which people don't really expect. And I had a couple of years as a kind of HR recruitment assistant, which actually was super interesting. And it was a good grounding in understanding even just how universities work as institutions. I really learned a lot in that couple of years. And I loved the relationships part of it. So I was trying to find my way. And I saw an alumni officer job come up at the University of Manchester. So I was still living in London at the time. And I just thought it sounded like a really nice job. I loved the mix of volunteer management, comms, kind of I guess, a bit of engagement. So I just thought it seemed nice. And I was really lucky enough. They took a chance on me and gave me that job. So they introduced me to Case and to all that kind of networks. Yeah, I was there for a couple of years. Following that, I still twisted and turned slightly. I then went into various different roles, including with Hannah at London Business School. But I was then in a more comms focused role. So I was in the fundraising alumni team. But I went down the digital comms route specifically for a couple of years and kind of honed my skills there, which was, again, hugely educational because I worked with a massive range of institutions, schools and kind of Oxford colleges and US institutions and some Australian institutions. So I learned, again, a lot about the kind of broader sector and particularly digital giving. But after that, I ultimately missed alumni relations. So when I saw a job at the Sutton Trust come up that happened to be shared by someone I'd met through the Case network and that I previously worked with, I had only good things about it. And it proved to be a really lovely shift back.
Awesome. Well, lots of amazing background across the sector and with different institutions. Marie-Rose, let's talk a little bit more about your work at Sutton Trust. Sutton Trust focuses on social mobility and supporting students from lower income backgrounds. Let's talk more about your work in alumni engagement and how you support the mission in ways that might differ from perhaps traditional higher ed settings.
Absolutely. So I guess I should say, for starters, there are actually a lot of similarities with our work with higher education institutions, but I'd say probably the big difference, or perhaps just the biggest shift in kind of emphasis, is that for the Sutton Trust, from our perspective and how we serve our alumni, the networking piece and the connection together it's far and away the most important. So really making sure that we are giving opportunities for alumni to connect, to build those relationships, both with their kind of immediate peers and then with alums above them in the career stage. It's so important for us because the young people we work with by default do not have the same professional networks as their peers, often from more affluent backgrounds, particularly because of the demographic of the Sutton Trust. It's our target students are the top 15% in attainment from the bottom 40% socioeconomically. So by default, they are aspiring to successful careers. They are aspiring to elite institutions. And when they get to those places, they find lots of their peers have these hugely established networks with their family and friends that they just don't have. So encouraging a culture of alumni seeing their peers within the Sutton Trust network as their future kind of network for career progression and to kind of support each other is really crucial. So that is definitely a real centre for our approach. And I know that that is still kind of important in university alumni relations, but I would say it's less of a really big focus. And secondly, and particularly in terms of our delivery and our activity for alumni, their employability support is still also really, really important. And again, because even though academically the outcomes of our students often surpass some of their peers from more wealthier backgrounds, they still are struggling to get the same jobs. There's still a lot of bias in industries and certain kind of corporate cultures in particular, where hiring practices are still favouring students from more affluent backgrounds. And so we're kind of trying to address the bigger picture of the sector as a charity, but in the meantime we want to support our alumni as much as possible to get those those unique opportunities. So we do a lot of work with corporate partners on, I guess we do a lot of work perhaps similar to what career teams might do at universities. We're kind of doing a lot of that all in one in our alumni team. We're doing a lot of kind of introductions to employees, sourcing of bespoke internships for our alums, but we're also still that networking piece is really important. So I would say that, yeah, those are the two big focuses. But in other ways, otherwise, a lot of our activity really mirrors what you might expect from a typical institution. Quick caveat, and I will say, just to blow my own trumpet, our engagement is probably higher than I've ever experienced when I've worked at universities. I think the nature of the programs the students do with us, a lot of them feel super engaged, super grateful, and we really capitalize on that. We benefit from having great relationships with them. So our open rates are brilliant.
Yeah. Hannah, let's talk a little bit about your work at Regent. So you mentioned part of your role includes the career function of the school, which is great. I led a merged alumni career team myself, and I think it's a great alignment. But Regents is also a bit of a different type of institution and perhaps a non-traditional university. Can you talk a bit about the transition to being a for-profit school and how that affected the approach to alumni engagement?
Yeah, so in 2020, so when I joined Regent in the beginning of 2020, we were a not-for-profit private institution. And then during the pandemic, we were acquired by a company called Galileo Education Group, and they are a for-profit company. So we are now effectively a for-profit organisation. But in terms of the way that changes our approach to alumni engagement, the answer to that is it doesn't really. I think what it has done is it's provided us with this incredible network of partner schools that are also in the Galileo group. And that's opened up doors to really interesting collaborations. It's provided our alumni with a much wider network to be part of the Galileo group. I think the major difference, the major direction change from that acquisition was that we no longer fundraise. So that's probably the biggest change of direction from when I joined. I joined because the direction was we were going to be a fundraising institution, and my role was to start building up that engagement for further down the road when we start thinking about fundraising. But as we transitioned into a for-profit, we made that decision to not be a fundraising institution. So I think that's probably the only major change. And in terms of how we approach alumni, that hasn't really changed either, because our focus is still around that alumni engagement, that alumni experience, but more from a kind of brand ambassadorship. And, it's not, our focus isn't, fundraising doesn't come into that, but what comes into it is where are our great stories, who has done some really interesting, amazing things, who's really engaged with us and is out in the world, because we are a majority international, who is out shouting about their Regis experience and sharing that with their community and with prospective students and with people who might want to come and join us at Regents. So I'd say that was really the only major change, but apart from that, it's quite similar to what Marie-Rose was saying, what you'd expect in a more traditional university.
Yeah, I mean, just underscoring for you both the many ways that alumni can contribute to institutional priorities, whether that's philanthropic or, in the other ways that you've highlighted. So really interesting. And let's talk a little bit about the podcast, because I love it. I came upon it kind of by accident, and your podcast Trials and Errors focuses on failures and what people have learned from them. And what inspired you to create a podcast with that focus rather than highlighting successes? Because I feel like so many of the things that I tune into are like, this person did this and so can you, right? And like copy their success, right? And you guys, I love your podcast because it just gets authentic very quickly, it gets real very fast. And I'm surprised at what people will, kind of admit to on air to the whole advancement community. So maybe can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, Marie-Rose, do you want to start with the
Yeah, I'll jump in, and Hannah, feel free to add from your perspective. I guess, to be totally transparent, part of the inspiration was the podcast that exists currently called How to Fail, which is an interview series in the UK, and it is very popular, where kind of famous people will share things that have gone wrong. So the kind of the sentiment of that, I've listened to that before, and I liked the way that leads to questions when that's set up as the premise. But secondly, I think from a more personal perspective, and Hannah and I have discussed this a lot, I've definitely had very good managers. I've been quite fortunate to have a lot of good managers and leaders over my career so far. So when I've reflected about what I've liked about them, it is that approachability, it is that willingness to kind of share and be human and lead in a way that's quite authentic. So I think the combination of those things, it kind of was culminating in my mind, and I was thinking, I want to do a case panel, maybe I'll suggest this as the topic, but it was Hannah then who suggested kind of converting that into a series. So Hannah, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I sat on that panel with Marie-Rose in Edinburgh at the Case Europe conference, and it was such a great panel. I felt like, some really great conversations came out of the panelists sharing just a big blooper that they've done. And when I got home after that conference, I thought, I don't think the conversation ends there. I really feel like that was something that everybody in the room got. People were putting their hands up and just sharing their latest mistake as though they had to get it off their chest. And, I just felt like, I think there's so much more that we can do there. And, it's really important to me. I've always been very, very risk averse. I'm always somebody who's scared of getting into trouble. I don't want to make a mistake. I'm really, conscious of doing anything slightly risky just in case it goes wrong. And I spoke to somebody when me and Marie-Rose were setting up this session, and she knows me quite well, and I was talking to her, and she said, of course you're doing this because you want to normalize making mistakes, because this is something that you are scared of. So of course you're doing a podcast around this to normalize it. And I thought, yeah, you know what, I'm going to, because everybody makes mistakes all the time. And actually, when we started exploring this, like you said, Nicole, it's amazing how people are really keen to share their mistakes and really enjoy talking about it, actually. So I think it was something that was really close to me. And I just think, as you said, we go to these case conferences, we get together all the time and say, hey, look at this amazing thing that we did, and it went really, really well, and you should all try this because it's amazing. But actually, we never go, oh God, guys, do not try this. This was awful. I tried it. You don't have to. This is where it went wrong. This is what I learned from it. So yeah, that's where it came from.
And do you guys have a favorite story from the podcast that you've heard so far?
I can share first, because I was thinking about this ahead of time, and I think one of my favorites, which also was one of the first ones we did, and it was with two people that I formerly worked with at the University of Manchester. So Chris Cox, who then was the director at Manchester University of the Fundraising Alumni, and is now, I can't remember his exact title, maybe Dean of Advancement at University of Edinburgh. Chris shared a really brilliant example, and that was very honest, from when he joined the University of Edinburgh, and it really touched on those themes of which Hannah and I have discussed so much on that series, of kind of how much of your own knowledge you bring to a role and make assumptions about what fits that institution, because you're kind of hired to do that. They hire you on experience. However, everywhere is different. And when he joined Edinburgh, he'd kind of pushed forward with the decision to change how they received income. It was something, again, I won't explain it full, but it was one of those things where he wanted to pivot to having a separate charitable foundation arm to accept gifts, because that's what they'd done at Manchester and it worked well. So he was pushing through this change. And, a year into these very strategic, complicated kind of institutional level discussions, he realized that it actually, for various other reasons, it wasn't going to work, and it wasn't the best thing for Edinburgh. And he'd been pushing forward. He thought, well, we did this in Manchester and it worked really well. So, it was at least a year into that procedure and all the legal changes that he actually had to say, hold, actually, no, this isn't the right thing. I'm sorry, I've made the wrong decision here. Let's kind of reverse and U-turn, essentially. And I just think when he shared that, that's such a massive decision. If you really feel like you've committed, a year of these meetings and these legal committees to make changes like that happen at an institution that's as old and established as Edinburgh. And I thought it was so honest, it was so authentic, and it was so relatable that at every level, those kind of things happen when you start a job. And like I said, Hannah and I have seen that theme come up in examples of all levels of seniority. So that was one of my favorites, because I think it set a really nice tone for the series.
Yeah.
I think my favorites are the ones that are the ones where everyone goes, oh yeah, I've done that. So it's things like, you go to forward an email to your manager, but you accidentally reply to the person that's emailed you, and you might reply something that's a little bit risque or whatever, and you've sent it straight to that person, or at first name on a mass email instead of the actual name, you know, the things that everybody has done in their time. I like those ones because I know that people listening will be like, oh yeah, I've done that as well. And yeah, it's just the ones that where the learning comes out of it that I feel like people can really walk away with something practical that goes, okay, if that happens to me, at least I've got an idea of maybe what I could do or should not do in a sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because I think, you know, you can be crushed by some of those things, you know, or you can kind of pick yourself up and say, okay, everybody does it. I just need to own it and move on. Ryan, I got to ask, do you have a favorite failure that you'd like to share today?
Boy, I saw this sort of question and was thinking about it, and I have definitely had a bunch of failures. And when I think back pre-consulting, I suppose, to my last university job, there was in a couple different ways I failed at the same problem, which was attempting to build an online community. And first I launched the Graduate platform. Now it's called, I think, Gravity. And, I launch it and get everybody in there, and there's no community, right? So you basically invite people to like come to your shop, and there's nothing to buy, and so people don't come back again. And then rather than sort of reading up on how do you build successful online communities, right, I did it again, and I was like, okay, I'm going to make these affinity based groups, and I'm going to just have people sign up to be in the group before I even have a group to show them activity. And so I was like, because what I really was after was the metrics, right? I was after the engagement, the signups, right? And I think it's a critical area of failure that I think a lot of universities, particularly folks in our roles, really come across, which is there's a challenge around, we want to showcase engagement, and that forces us to sort of get people to sign up for things when there really isn't activity levels. And it doesn't jive with the way that we also measure engagement, which is around events, meaning the same volunteers that may be helpful in helping you put on an event don't necessarily make the best online community managers. And we don't teach them how to manage communities and spark ongoing conversation in those communities. And so I have written about it. If you go to my LinkedIn profile, it's been a little while, but I wrote extensively about my failures in building communities. And I think that a lot of schools were kind of coming to what I would describe as the end of an era of I would call the network platform era, where people have sort of opted in to be part of these communities with a promise of being a mentor. And then they opt into the community, and then no one ever reaches out to them to be a mentor or to, and people don't ever come back again. So, I think I learned in a couple of different ways how not to build online communities. And if I were to ever have another crack at, building one on behalf of a university, I would do sort of a slow and steady wins the race type of mentality, right? First, really leaning in on the very few people who want to start and be a part of it, and then grow slowly but surely, rather than having this big launch where you're trying to get everybody in and then they don't come back again. So I don't know, that was a little long-winded, but I've thought a lot about that, and there's a lot of, I'm sure you all have similar experiences around online communities.
100%. I would say that's such a relatable one for the sector. I think I've had so many conversations about that and similar experiences. So yeah, love that example.
Ryan, we might be inviting you on the podcast to talk about.
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk about my failures in that for sure.
Well, and I think our clients have all been the beneficiary of you learning lessons from those hard lessons, because, certainly it's something that, as you said, you've done a lot of work on since and a lot of thought leadership on now. So yeah, it's been a springboard to something pretty great. I think
it's really important, though, to, like you all are doing with your podcasts, is to make sure that we encourage people, right, to talk about the things that they've done wrong or that they've made mistakes. And I don't really remember very many people doing that. And I felt like I was really kind of putting myself out there and taking some risk in basically owning a failed investment of, I don't remember how much we paid for it, but it was thousands of dollars, right? And after 3 years of having that technology, basically saying, it didn't work. We screwed it up. It was a failure. Owning the fact that you've, you've done so and try to move on from it and teach other people not to do the same thing, right? So I really admire your work. All right, well, we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to wrap up our live show because we very quickly have come to the end of our first 30 minutes with Marie-Rose and Hannah, and we're excited to move on to the podcast edition. But before we do, Nicole, can you let folks know who we'll be hearing from on Alumless World and Alumless?
Yeah, so our next guest on Alumless next Friday will be Heather Stanley from Western Michigan University, where Ryan has been spending a lot of time. And on Alumless World in 2 weeks' time, we'll hear from Chung Feng. And Chung is the Director of Development and Alumni Relations at Duke Kunshan University, just outside of Shanghai in China. And she's going to talk about how to approach alumni engagement and development at what's basically a startup university. So DKU was formed in 2013, and with 5 years of the pandemic, it's really quite a new institution and just started graduating students very recently. So don't forget to subscribe to the podcast feed for both Alumless and Alumless World. And if you enjoyed this episode, or you know somebody who you think could get something out of Alumless, please do share it with them. And if you feel so compelled, leave us a nice review. It really helps us out a lot.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. For those of you who are listening on the podcast edition, we'll be back right after the break. For those who are watching on LinkedIn, thank you so much. And we'll be back next week.